You may be living with social anxiety without ever having called it that, because in their mind, everything seems too simple to be a real problem. You call yourself reserved, saying you're just tired and prefer to keep to yourself. You say you don't like empty conversations, and on the outside that even sounds coherent, but inside, you feel a discomfort that's hard to explain. Imagine yourself in a common setting, such as a work meeting, a casual encounter, or a last-minute invitation. Before any words are even spoken, you tense up and your mind begins to calculate possibilities. The air feels heavier, but it's not panic or explicit fear. It's a silent feeling that you need to be prepared without knowing exactly what for. And that's where social anxiety hides. Not like a blaring alarm, but like a continuous background noise, disguised as exhaustion, irritation, disinterest, and phrases like, "That's just how I am." Perhaps what you call personality is actually a silent adaptation your body has learned to protect itself. And when you understand that, something starts to move inside, even before you realize it. Before you can even form a conscious thought, your body has already decided that something there demands your attention. It's not a rational choice, it's a reflex. The heart rate increases slightly, breathing becomes irregular, and the muscles prepare to react. None of this happens because the situation is actually dangerous, but because for your nervous system, it looks with something that already happened. Social anxiety doesn't begin in the mind, it begins in the body, in a place far older than words. While you try to appear calm, an invisible part of you is scanning your surroundings and looking for signs of threat. The body enters such a subtle state of hypervigilance that you learn to live with it without questioning it. Therefore, seemingly simple situations can generate disproportionate fatigue. It's not the event itself that's exhausting, it's the constant effort to anticipate reactions and adapt quickly. The body remains in a state of alert for an extended period, and this consumes emotional energy. Over time, this constant activation starts to seem normal, and you think it's always been this way and that it's just part of who you are. But what is actually happening is a nervous system that has learned to survive in unpredictable environments where it has felt exposed, judged, and diminished. And the earlier this learning occurs, the less conscious he becomes. The body reacts before the mind can question, and before you realize it, you're already avoiding, postponing, and shutting down. What's most unsettling is that this anxiety doesn't need to shout to dictate decisions. She merely whispers, guiding her movements invisibly and preparing the ground for something even deeper. If you want to know more about this topic, like this video and watch it until the end. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive our content. We're going to talk a lot about mental health and emotional intelligence, and you can't miss it. Much of social anxiety doesn't manifest as obvious nervousness. It infiltrates such everyday habits that it begins to resemble personality traits. You don't realize when you start mentally rehearsing what you're going to say, not to express yourself better, but to avoid the feeling of being caught off guard. Unexpected calls cause disproportionate annoyance, not because they are intrusive, but because they break the control barrier. Replying to messages takes longer than it should, not because of a lack of interest, but because each reply carries weight. Eye contact is measured, sometimes avoided, not out of inattention, but out of a difficult-to-explain feeling of being watched excessively. Gradually, you begin to reduce your own space, speaking less than you think and feel, believing that this is prudence, maturity, or personal preference. The cruelest detail is that these signs are rarely recognized as anxiety. But behind them, there is a constant question that the body asks without words. Is it safe to be here right now? When this question never finds a clear answer, something becomes fixed inside. And the root of this isn't in the present, it's in emotional experiences that shaped how you learn to exist among people. The body holds records that the mind can no longer narrate clearly, not as organized memories, but as diffuse sensations that are activated without warning. Often, the origin of social anxiety lies not in a major, obvious trauma, but in small, repeated experiences that taught that putting oneself out there could have a cost. Constant criticism, even when disguised as guidance, shapes the perception of value. An environment where making mistakes was embarrassing teaches the body to anticipate, and situations where approval was rare create constant vigilance. Children learn that being watched is risky, and adults carry this logic into contexts that no longer require defense. Everything that has been experienced without acceptance becomes a warning sign. Over time, this conditioning solidifies, and you begin to believe that the problem is you, that there is something inappropriate in the way he speaks, moves, and exists. And in order to survive, it learns to adapt. It controls its gestures, adjusts its emotions, and reduces its spontaneity. What is rarely mentioned is that this adaptation was a form of emotional intelligence in a context where safety was not guaranteed. In other words, it was not weakness, but rather protection. Recognizing this changes everything, because when you understand that the pattern was created to protect, the guilt begins to dissolve. And it is at this point that the real possibility of change arises, not through force, but through understanding. Overcoming invisible social anxiety isn't about becoming more extroverted, nor is it about forcing behaviors that never felt natural. The journey begins in a more subtle place, teaching the body that the present is different from the past. And this doesn't happen through positive thinking, but through new, small, and consistent experiences. The nervous system needs reassurance signals before allowing any change. When you slow your breathing and reduce the urge to please, something begins to reorganize itself within you. Exposure, when done without awareness, only reinforces fear. But when it happens in layers, respecting real limits, it transforms into learning. Each situation overcome without collapsing sends a simple message to the brain. I survived, and I am safe. There is also an important internal shift. Instead of asking, what do they expect of me, you start asking yourself, how do I feel now? This movement restores presence, shifts the focus away from external surveillance, and brings attention inward. Interestingly, the less you try to conform, the more authentic your presence becomes. The self-confidence that emerges here doesn't come from performance, but from familiarity with oneself. It's about knowing how to recognize signs of overload before they take over and allowing yourself breaks without guilt. It's like relearning how to enter spaces carrying your own light without depending on anyone's immediate approval. When this process begins, something profound is revealed. Social anxiety was never the enemy. It was a misunderstood messenger. And understanding this prepares you for the final step, the one that completely redefines the relationship you have with yourself. Social anxiety ceases to be seen as a personal flaw and begins to be viewed as an intelligent response to experiences that required adaptation. The nervous system, silent signals, emotional memories, and reorganization pathways are not loose pieces. They form a coherent narrative of survival. You didn't learn to hide because you were weak, but because at some point, being fully present didn't seem safe. And the body did what it knew how to do. It reduced exposure, increased vigilance, and built subtle defenses. The problem was never about feeling too much, but rather about not having had the space to feel safely. This shift in perspective is profoundly transformative. It transforms guilt into compassion, tension into curiosity, fear into listening. From that point on, social anxiety loses its function of absolute control. It doesn't disappear completely, but it ceases to dictate your choices. You begin to recognize its signals before they take over your body and learn to respect its rhythms, discovering that you can be present without harming yourself internally. Living this way means becoming more whole, more aligned with what you feel, more aware of your own space, and freer to choose when to approach and when to retreat. Presence ceases to be a risk and becomes a possibility. Perhaps throughout this video, you recognized parts of yourself that had never been named before. If this has happened to you, know that you are not alone. Many live in silence with this same pattern, believing it's just their way of being. But now you know, social anxiety doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means you learned to survive in environments where you needed to protect yourself, but what you learned can be transformed. You don't need to hide to be accepted. First, you need to accept yourself. If this video brought more clarity to this topic, please like and share it with others who also need to know this. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch future videos. See you next time.